this concept of free banking, which is something that's only come up very recently for me. And so let me give you an explanation as to the situation I'm seeing unfolding. So first of all, shout out to Max Hillebrand, who came on the podcast and just is awesome in terms of his insight on how Austrian economics actually functions. And he contacted me a few weeks later, said, you've got to get Hubertus on the podcast because he's building a really interesting product, BitCredit. And I'd love to hear your questions for him. So Hubertus joined me, and shout out to Hubertus for coming on the podcast. And he talked through, and by all means go back and dig up these episodes, he talked through what BitCredit is. And I guess the precursor to that was I did a bit of research that Max sent to me, and the Austrian economists have always observed that the idealistic scenario of a fixed money supply is true, but to an extent. And the extent is that the liquidity or the elasticity of money is also required. And Hubertus has some content that you can dig up where I think this presentation was at Adopting Bitcoin. I forget, sorry. But it's about a 30-minute long presentation where he shows how a mini industry functions with a fixed money supply. And essentially there's a problem, there's a cash flow problem when you're looking at primary resource production. And so very high level, it's like, okay, you've got to chop the wood down, then you've got to move the wood to somewhere else, then you've got to create the thing, and then you've got a product. And through that whole supply chain, the value that's exchanged en route essentially gets to a point where one of the participants in the chain, they don't have the cash flows in reserve to actually pay for the thing that they need. And so a fixed money supply does create problems when it comes to the functioning of a industry. And this is very business focused. And so what it's helped me learn about is this idea that, hang on a second, we're so used to the idea that there's a monopoly on money creation through central banking. But like, what if anyone could create money? Now, in some ways, the crypto market is that, right? It's people who can just create their own tokens. I'm the creator of this money. I can print as much as I want, and off to the races. It's a reincarnation of central banking in digital form. It's why it's so easy to compare the difference between Bitcoin and the rest of crypto, right? Bitcoin, no CEO, fixed supply, rules don't change, digital gold. Everything else in crypto, highly speculative software projects. But it's like, okay, what happens, and this is what BitCredit is designed to solve, is when a business adopts a Bitcoin standard and they have a fixed monetary supply and they're part of a supply chain, how do they pay their supplier if their buyer hasn't yet paid them? And it's really interesting problem that I simply wasn't aware of until coming across Hubertus. And it's awesome. It's a really awesome thing to think about. And in his view, the true adoption of Bitcoin has been held back by this problem. So we can never have a true Bitcoin standard unless there is elasticity of money on top of the fixed money supply. And again, go and have a look at some of Hubertus's content to get a closer view on this. But during the conversation, I had one of those amazing kind of light bulb moments, and only podcasting gives you this ability where you start to meet lots of people doing lots of different stuff. And you can become a connector. And I thought about, I know, I've got a friend called Ben. And I even said this in the podcast, do you know Ben Gunn? And he didn't, right? And so Ben tells a great story. Again, you can dig up his episode, go and find it. But he bought a piece of land in Wales, in the UK, and he turned it into a forestry business. And to paraphrase like 5 years of his life, he realized that the best way to create value was to actually have a completely vertically linked supply chain of additional value at each stage. And so, sorry if I butcher this, Ben, but basically grow the trees, fell the trees, chop the trees into something that's actually useful, create something that's actually useful, and then sell. And so he started to create like roofing materials for buildings and has got an actual warehouse on site with a huge lathe that is chopping the trees up. And I was like, you should talk to Ben, because Hubertus needed a business case for a person who's already adopted a Bitcoin standard, but is in control of multiple business entities that are trading with each other. And so I created a Signal group. I introduced Hubertus and Ben, and oh my God, what I have since seen is epic, where there's an energy of like, fuck, you've got a problem. Ben has got a problem. He's absolutely got a problem. Liquidity is his problem between his entities. It's like they all need to pay each other, but they don't all get paid at the same time. And it's clearly solving problems for both parties. And so what I hope will come out of it is a prototype, essentially. And that's how this type of technology is developed, through connecting the right people at the right time who can then make progress. They'll try something, it won't work. They'll try something else, it will work. They'll iterate from the two of those points. And it's just like, that's just pure magic, being able to introduce people that then start to immediately make progress for both of their like self-interests, but equally the collaboration that's required to do that is part of the magic. So shout out to Max for the original intro to Hubertus. Shout out to Hubertus and his team for building BitCredit. And shout out to Ben for all the work he's doing with his forestry. It's absolutely epic. And I really hope that they can figure this out. And we'll see a pretty historic moment. I think I'll conclude this with like, being open-minded is such an important part of this journey. And when I first understood that, like, fix money supply, fix the money supply. Yes, absolutely fix the money supply. But what we're talking about here is a difference between base money and broad money. And so it helps solidify in my mind, like, Bitcoin obsoletes central banks. And that's because it's going to give us a fixed monetary supply upon which we can build other financial tools. And so central banking enables a handful of people to print money out of thin air with debt that is not secured against anything, right? 1971, the US dollar was taken off the gold standard. It's super simple. Like, a dollar represents literally just faith in nothing, in my view. But the ability to peg credit against Bitcoin is very, very, very different. And so you'll have a very good picture on what is the current baseline money in the system versus what is the circulating credit. And I think that is going to be a complete game changer for finance. And take that a step further, it's like, okay, if you have a supply chain of businesses that all have a track record of trusting each other because they both need each other in order to exist, but equally they can grow together, make progress together, create value, why couldn't a business simply issue money itself? It's like, well, I know that you guys are going to turn up with the supplies that I need in 3 months' time because you've done it for 10 years and I have a really high trust in your service. And I know that the person that's buying my goods is definitely going to be able to pay for them in 3 months' time because they've done it for 10 years. Well, I, as the middleman, why can't I issue my own money? Now, it doesn't have to be dollars or euros or yen or whatever a central bank calls money. It could be some kind of receipt or certificate of trade, or whatever you want to describe it. And that's really where BitCredit comes in. It's like a decentralized layer that requires lower trust, but you can issue your own money. You're like, wow, that would be unbelievable, because you're not going to issue your own money to someone that's not going to pay you back, right? The individual in the base case economic scenario is not going to take outrageous risk with their money. They're like, no, I can do this because I know you're going to pay me back. And they're going to have a much better view on the risk of that trade than 6 blokes that control the Federal Reserve, right? Oh, let's up the interest rate because, why not? And that's obviously hugely paraphrasing the decision-making process they go through. But anyway, long story short, the innovation that's happening on top of Bitcoin is one of the reasons to be most bullish about this thing. It's like, why should you buy a portion of this network? It's like, well, you've got all these people now connected together by the base layer money that want to go on and build things that solve real problems. And this is just one example of that happening. And in particular is interesting because it was an area that I'd overlooked and has only come to my attention because of the podcast and these people that I'm now meeting and introducing. So absolutely love that. Great vibe.